everybody can hear me. Usually I'm the one that can't hear anybody, so I sit in the back and, and strain myself. So I'm hoping this works. My name's Helen Nurska. I'm the director of the Clinton County Historical Association. Jackie Madison is my friend. We work together on a number of projects, I don't know, 3 or 4, and it seems. And I am so pleased that she's coming to talk with us tonight about a subject that she has researched for a number of years and keeps coming up with new information for us. And it all makes the history of Clinton County more interesting, more exciting, and more real. I have her bio, but she wrote it in such small print, and it was a PDF, so I couldn't make it big enough for me to read. But that's fine. I'm going to read this the best I can. We know she's president of the Underground Railroad Historical Association, the North Star Underground Railroad Historical Association, which heads up the North Star Underground Railroad Museum near Ausable Chasm, which I'm hoping all of us have already been to. It is absolutely wonderful. She retired from Wyeth, Pfizer Wyeth, in 2010 as a principal toxicology information specialist for drug safety, and has degrees in chemistry and library and information management. Jackie's a Vietnam veteran. Her husband is retired from the military, and they have 2 daughters. And she has a granddaughter that looks just like her. She's so cute. I saw them both smile. I saw them last week, and I thought, oh my gosh, I hope my granddaughters smile like I smile. That was great. So anyway, she's a Rotarian, a Delta Kappa Gamma, and a Phi Kappa Phi. Her biggest contribution to the organization as the president was acquiring that house that the North Star Underground Railroad Museum is in June of 2019. Jackie's an avid reader, grows grapes, makes wine. Ooh, did you bring us some? No.
I want you to listen.
Yeah, she wants us to stay awake and listen, that's all right. And recently started restoring old trunks. In October 2019, she had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to visit a site that was an African-American community composed of slaves and fugitives escaping slavery in St. Armand, Quebec. Jackie's working on a book of the Underground Railroad in the Adirondack and North Country area, and with a group of us that my part is really, really tiny, but I'm so glad to work on this, and developing a website on people of color who lived in the Lake Champlain area. In 2022, she received the Outstanding Librarian Award for the North Country from Senator Sean Ryan, who chairs the New York State Senate Libraries Committee, and a New York State Assembly citation from Assemblyman Billy Jones. She's also, you didn't put this on here, she's also the president of the Women's Rights Association. Women's Rights Alliance, that's it, of New York State. And she's also the president of that, and that's, so we have, I'll turn this over to Jackie, enough of all of this, and she's going to really, this is going to be great. Thanks, Jackie, for coming.
For such tiny words, she was able to read it very good, I think. Before, can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. Okay, turn it up. Hello?
Oh, that's better.
Is that better? Okay, maybe I wasn't speaking directly into it. I want to encourage everyone, before I start, to visit the North Star Underground Railroad Museum. It is a really great museum, and I'm not saying that because I'm president. I'm saying that based on the visitors that have come. We are open this month and next month, 11 to 5, on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But right now, we're here to talk about the people of color that lived in this community. They are local stories about individuals who were entrepreneurs, devoted Christians, farmers, skilled laborers, and they made this region of New York their home. There were also those individuals who did things that put them in prison. These were individuals who I think did some extraordinary things in a time when many in their culture were struggling to survive. Before I introduce them, though, I would like to mention that there were 3 locations that housed African Americans in the late 18th century into the first half of the 19th century. 2 of the areas were roads, and one was near the Beartown ski area. You can kind of see the Beartown one if you look closer to me.
Yeah.
This is not the greatest map, but this was the best one I could find. The first road is between the State Road and Moffett Road, and on the Beekmantown side that the colored people lived. This road is referred to as, and I'll say in quote, the Hill Road, in quotes. Obadiah, Allison, and Abraham Doty lived on this road until 1837. The second road is in the town of Altona. According to the Clinton and Franklin County history by Heard, it was the 4th road to be built in that part of the town. It is mentioned as the road over Negro Hill. There were known to be at least 2 families of colored people who lived on this road over a period of approximately 40 years. Russ Wheeler was head of one family. Surnames of other individuals on this road included Billings, Jett, and Danford. And this road today, I think, is called Atwood because Mr. Atwood lived on it. The third area was at the north end of Beartown, near Joe Hannigan's camp. There was a settlement of black people, free of course, as slavery had been abolished supposedly in these parts. The settlement was sometimes called North Africa. Most traces, though, of this settlement has disappeared. The region of Beartown was considered an Underground Railroad post stop, but we don't have any really, I should say, documentation. It's really by word of mouth that has been thrown around. But let's learn more about some of the African Americans that lived in this region. The first 2 individuals to arrive in the Lake Champlain region was actually Ireland and David. They were William Gilliland's slaves. Ireland and David were first mentioned in the book, 3 Centuries in Lake Champlain. On January 2nd, 1767, they came home from the South Field and were frostbitten. While it's unclear when David arrived in the Lake Champlain area, Ireland came with Gilliland's family, June 22nd, 1766. According to Gilliland, and I quote, "I, William Gilliland, with my wife, Mrs. Eliza Gilliland, my mother, Mrs. Jane Gilliland, my sister, Miss Charity Gilliland, my brother, Mr. James Gilliland, my daughter, Miss Eliza Gilliland, my niece, Miss Eliza Hamilton, my servant girl, Rachel McFarland, and my Negro man, Ireland, all arrived at mealtime in Willsboro with 2 platoon loads of stores, having left New York with 22 wagon loads of stores, furniture, etc. on the 28th of April last. On August 20th, 1771, in the 3 century books it says about 4 years, but it was really actually 5 years, after his arrival in Willsboro, the following ad was posted in the Montreal newspaper, the Quebec Gazette, and it said, "To any persons or persons who shall discover and secure the following person who absconded on Sunday night, the 18th instance, from their master, the subscriber residing in Willsboro, Lake Champlain, end quote. Ireland was described as a Negro man, aged about 28 years. He had a straight, well-made, likely fellow. He was about 5 feet 6 or 7 inches high. He spoke English tolerably plain, but no other language except for his native country. And as he was lived with me without any appearance of discontent for upwards of 13 years. It is supposed he has been seduced by the little fellow that is gone off with him, and who is well known to many in Canada for his villainy. This villain was Francis Freeland, a bound servant. The ad had an award of $6 for both, or half of it for either one of them. However, on June 5th, 1785, Gilliland left Ireland with another man and 4 oxen in Ticonderoga to haul logs to the sawmill. So Ireland did not retain his freedom permanently, since Gilliland referred to him as my Negro man. David isn't mentioned after 1767. Nathaniel Platt from Plattsburgh had one slave that went to Canada to help his son. His name was Dia, or Dick, as it was stated in the book Done with Slavery. In September 1794, Dia fled to Montreal, then on to St. Eustatius, where he found refuge. Platt sent a man, it was either Eden Johnston or Johnson, a farmer and a slave catcher after him. But because Johnson did not own Dia, he was unable to have him apprehended. To facilitate the proceedings, the second time, Johnson purchased Dia from Platt for 80 pounds, New York currency, the equivalent at that time of about 50 pounds Quebec currency, which allowed him to claim Dia as his own, with a bill of sale to prove his ownership. Johnston secured a warrant from a magistrate, McCord, and had Dia arrested and taken to jail in Montreal. Dia appeared before the Court of Quarter Sessions on 14 October 1794, when a bench of 4 magistrates, including McCord, ruled that, and I quote this, slavery was not known by the laws of England, and therefore discharged the Negro man. Such was the magistrate's opinion as reported in a newspaper, the only account we have of the outcome. Although this low court ruling established no binding precedent, it was, if accurately reported, a rather stunning verdict, all the more so since McCord's 3 fellow magistrates, Dr. Charles Blake, James Finlay, and Alexander Henry the Elder, were current or former slave owners. People of color, some information on African Americans can only be found in ads. To purchase them or for those individuals hoping to escape slavery. In the local newspaper, I've only found one ad seeking to purchase a Negro. And there was one ad that identified a Negro runaway that had a rather large reward. The other ads referenced Negroes as indentured servants, but that could have been a gentler way of saying slaves. These ads appeared between 1814 and 1834. This one is for a waiter for military. It was published May 21st, 1814, and they wanted a waiter for an officer. Needed to be a Negro. It needs to be 15 to 20 years of age. It appeared again June 11th. This one, John Patton, and this is the really high reward, was with the military, and his subscriber was John C. Rochester. He was a captain in the 29th Infantry at a camp near Plattsburgh. The ad stated that on the evening of the third day instance, a Negro man named John Patton, aged about 20 years, about 5 feet 10 inches high, black eyes, and of a dark mulatto complexion. He had the initials of his name marked with Indian ink in small capital letters on his right arm, between the elbow and the wrist. Whoever will secure in any jail the above-named Negro that the subscriber may get him shall receive the above reward and all reasonable charges if delivered at this place. As it is supposed he will be lurking about the vicinity of New York and Albany, the editors of the Columbian and Argus will please give this a few insertions in their papers on account of John C. Rochester. The ad was first placed in the newspaper on October 8th, and it ran weekly until December 31st, so for 3 months. And as you can see, the reward was $50. Most of these were a few cents, maybe $1. But today, that $50 would equal $830.39. This was the final ad that I found in the historic newspapers for Clinton County. It was dated January 4th, 1834. And the listing was for an indented servant girl named Juliana Dupay. She was 13 years old. She had a dark complexion and was thick-set. She ran away. She was wearing a blue calico frock and a green silk bonnet. And of course, all the ads forbid anyone for helping them and for allowing these individuals to incur a debt. And her reward was for 1 cent. That ad first appeared November 16, 1833. Okay. We will move on to some other individuals. These were definitely freed individuals. Peter and Amanda Billings. Peter first appeared in the 1850 U.S. Census, which said he was born about 1803 in Vermont. He is 47, living with his wife, Amanda Smith, from New Hampshire, who is white. Peter's father was born in New York, and his mother's birthplace is New Hampshire. He is a laborer, and his race was always classified as a mulatto. Peter and Amanda have 5 children: Calvin, Martha, Justice, Solly, and Sanford. His occupation continued to be a day laborer in the 1860 census, and they have another daughter, Ellen. The family resided in Altona and lived on the Over Negro Hill Road in Altona, as Atwood is also listed on that page. His birth date, as well as his wife's, is now about 7 years later, 1810 and 1811, respectively. I did not find an 1870 census on him. He was still, though, in Altona in 1880, and he was now a farmer. Peter owned 37 acres of land and may have owned more per the non-population schedules of the U.S. Census. But there was a piece of paper which you can see on the screen that covered the fourth area of unimproved land. He owned $416 in land, buildings, livestock, and machinery, and he paid wages of $4 in 1879. Peter had $100 in farm production, 10 acres of grassland, and harvested 9 tons of hay. When the 1880 census surfaces, his birth date is back to 1802. 6 of his children, ranging in age from 29 to 44, lived with him and his wife, George, Eliza, Martin, Charles, Sanford, and Helen. So this was definitely a family farm. Alexander and Caroline Curtin. Alexander Umulato first appeared in the census in 1850 and was born in Quebec, Canada. He was living with a black woman and 2 of her children, and their last names were Queen in Burlington, Vermont. Her first name was Caroline. She was 29 years old. In 1853, Alexander married a lady named Caroline Crabtree. You notice on the screen the only information on the certificate are the names of the bride, groom, the residence of the groom, the date of the marriage, party officiating, and the name of the town clerk. In the 1860 census, he was living with Caroline and his inferred son, John, in Burlington. In the 1870 census, Alexander's race has changed from mulatto to black. He works as a machinist, and his real estate is valued at $3,000, and his personal estate value is $200. He now resides in Plattsburgh with his son, a daughter, and 4 other women whose ages are 24, 49, 70, and 74. One may be the daughter of Caroline Queen, and the other 2 may be members of his family. All the members are listed as black in the household. This is the last census available for him. He dies April 3rd, 1888, and his birth date is recorded as August 4th, 1823. Caroline Curtin, her maiden names were not for certain if it was Crabtree or Queen, was born in New York about 1821. She married Alexander Curtin in 1853, and they would have 2 children. And her race at the time, in 1850 and 60, was considered to be mulatto. Her father, she said, was born in England and her mother in New York. Caroline was living in Plattsburgh in the 1870 census, and her race is now black. She was a housekeeper. Caroline moved from Plattsburgh to Beekmantown when she completed the 1880 census. The non-population schedules, which is the agricultural section of the census, show that she owned 52 acres of land valued at $1,500 and had farm equipment, machinery, and livestock worth $200 each. Caroline spent $3 on building repairs, and she paid $30 to laborers for 6 weeks of work. The estimated value of the farm production was $255. 5 tons of hay was harvested. She had 2 horses and 4 milch cows, 3 calves dropped. She made 400 pounds of butter, owned 2 swines, and had 20 barnyard poultry. Caroline had a granddaughter, brother, and mother staying with her. They were all listed as mulatto, except her mother, who was listed as black. When the 1900 census came out, she had moved to Burlington and was a boarder in the home of Jacob Bland, a barber, who was black from West Virginia. Caroline at this time is classified as black. Her parents' birthplaces was listed as unknown, but she was 79 and may no longer have remembered that information. Caroline's life in the 1900s may have been the result of a lawsuit that challenged her inheritance, and that's in the newspaper. The plaintiff was Cornelia L. Walworth. The attorney was Campbell McLean, and the suit occurred between May and October 1888. Her husband had died in April of 1888. The land was auctioned off October 8, 1888, at the courthouse in the village of Plattsburgh at 10 a.m. The referee for the auction was H.S. Johnson. No date was provided for her death, but her birth date was listed as August 25, 1820. Levi Danford. Levi Danford was born in New York. His birth dates range from 1828 to 1832. He completed an 1860 census in Burlington, Vermont, and another in Peru, New York, for the same year. His first documented entry into the region, though, was on January 18, 1855, when he was arrested on third-degree burglary and larceny charges and was sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in the Clinton prison in Essex, New York. His physical descriptions included his height at 5 feet 1.5 inches. He had powder marks on the right cheek. His right shoulder was larger than his left shoulder, and he had a short neck. In 1860, Levi worked as a laborer in Burlington and was living with 6 females, and their surnames was Coughlin, Joseph, Danford, and Freeman. Both of the Joseph ladies and the Freeman were mulattoes, and Levi's race was black. On the census in Peru, he was a farm laborer for the Hickstaff family, and his race was black. Eliza Danford was his inferred spouse when he took the 1870 census. His age was 39, and his birth date was now 1831. And his race was white. He had moved to Beekmantown, and his occupation was still a farm laborer. He had 4 children, Isabel, Henry, Rosanna, and Benny. In the 1880 census, his race changed to mulatto. He had moved to Altona, probably on the road, Negro Hill Road, and his occupation was listed as laborer. His wife's race became white that year, and mulatto again in the 1880 census. Her maiden name was listed as W.A. with 2 question marks, and I'm assuming that the transcribers could not read the family's last name. In this census, which was his last one, his wife and Isabel kept house. Levi and Henry were laborers. Rosanna was a servant, and his son Benjamin was at home. He was still a child. Ben Durkee is my next individual. He was born about 1877. His wife was Marie Mitchell. They had 2 children, Francis and Eugene. The family resided on Couch Street. Ben was the proprietor of the Windsor Lunch on Clinton Street. Ben first showed up in the U.S. City Directories of Plattsburgh in 1907. He lived at 12 Clinton J in the city, and his occupation was listed as chef. In 1909, he lived on 7 Howland Street, And in 1912, his address was 42 Couch Street. In the Plattsburgh Sentinel, it states, and I quote, Benjamin Durkee, proprietor of the Windsor Lunch on Clinton Street, has been seriously ill of pneumonia at the Physicians' Hospital. His recovery is, however, now looked forward to, end quote. This was dated February 9, 1917. However, on February 13, 1917, there were 2 entries in the newspaper about Ben. The first entry was the announcement of his funeral, which was to be held that afternoon at 3 o'clock from his late home on Couch Street. Reverend Roy D. Wood from the Baptist Church conducted the services, and Ben was laid to rest at the Riverside Cemetery. The second entry stated that he had been ill for about 2 weeks and that he died Saturday morning of heart failure. He had been in poor health for several months, but they had hoped he would recover. Mr. Durkee was widely known in this city and county as one of the best chefs in northern New York. He was cordial and courteous to all, and thoroughly capable in his profession. For many years, he had been a chef with the 5th Infantry U.S. Army and had been employed by several of its leading officers for some time. About 10 years ago, though, Ben located to Plattsburgh and eventually went into business for himself here. Marie was born in Auburn, Alabama, and she was Ben's wife. She appeared in the Plattsburgh Sentinel twice. The first time on December 25th, 1908, and she was on page 1. Johnny Chagnon, last Friday, waived examination on the charge of burglary and grand larceny in entering the residence of W.M. Foote and stealing a quantity of jewelry and $7 in cash. The value of the watches and rings being about $75. Marie Durkee, the colored servant, identified the jewelry as belonging to her, and it was returned. Johnny was unable to make a $500 bail, and he was locked up to await the action of the next grand jury. On July 29, 1940, at 125, there was a fire record of a chimney fire at 20 Miller Street, the home of Mrs. Ben Durkee. In 1939, Marie lived at 20 Miller Street. In 1954, though, she had moved to 33 Miller Street. Her obituary appeared in the June 8, 1954 issue. She passed away at her home, 33 Miller Street. She was 77 years old. Mrs. Durkee was long a devoted employee in the household of the late William M. Foote, having served the family for more than 40 years. Funeral services were held at the Foote residence, 7 Helen Street, Wednesday afternoon at 2 for Mrs. Durkee. The Reverend Howell L. Stemmel, minister of the First Methodist Church, officiated, and burial was in the Riverside Cemetery. John Fontley Roy is my next person, and he was born in Schenectady, New York, about 1889, but his parents actually came from South Carolina. He was married to Margaret, and they rented a house on Miller Street. Margaret would reside in that home for 20 years. John was literate, and his World War I draft registration card lists his race as Ethiopian. Per his draft card, John had black hair and eyes and was tall and slender. There's also a card there for his brother Harry, who also lived in this region.
Look at this.
He was a wage earner, working as a waiter at Literal House Grill, and was employed nights at the Plattsburgh Club. John, though, had a harrowing near-death experience prior to his death in 1921. 3 Negro card players, he was actually playing in a card game. He got into a fight. He was slashed from the right to the left side of his neck by another Negro, John Robinson. So 3 Negro card players took him to Dr. Thompson's office, who sent him to the physician's hospital. The doctor told the sheriff that he could have died if he hadn't been brought to him. This incident occurred October 1917, but unfortunately, he would die as a result of a self-inflicted gunshot, which grazed the lower part of his heart and passed through his lungs almost 4 years later in October 1921. He had just arrived home, kissed his wife, and walked into the bedroom. His wife saw him standing before a dresser. He had removed his coat and was trying to loosen his collar when the revolver was heard. With a groan, the unfortunate man sank to the floor. There was an element of mystery in the shooting, inasmuch as there was apparently no reason for the man's deliberately taking his own life. John was described as a hard-working man and of an excellent disposition and character. He was highly spoken of by his employer, Mr. Howell, who regarded him as faithful, obliging, and dependable. He was interred in Riverside Cemetery, and his pallbearers were Fred Anderson, Beecher Hamilton, James Baxter, Eugene Graves, and Francis P. Jones. John, as I said, had a brother that lived in Plattsburgh, Harry, who was recently discharged honorably from the U.S. Navy at the time. Margaret, we get to see a person. Margaret Fontley Roy was actually born in Spartan, Georgia, March 15, 1875, per an interview with her in the Plattsburgh Press Republican. She was married to John. Her nickname was Maggie, and she could read and write, but had never attended school. She came to Plattsburgh when her husband had a job on the boat called Vernon. Maggie was a servant for private families. When her husband died in 1921, she put her belongings in storage and became a housekeeper for Dr. Ira Rawson, taking care of his 4 children. Maggie loved children and church. She was a member of the First Methodist Church in Plattsburgh and became a full-fledged member on July 1st, 1917. In the Plattsburgh Sentinel, dated December 6, 1918, Maggie had the first entry under the personal mentions section, which I refer to as the gossip column, which said, and I quote, "Mrs. J.C. Fontley Roy of this city is visiting relatives in Atlanta, Georgia," end quote. Maggie was a member of the Mizpah Circle and represented the congregation of the First Methodist Church when the cornerstone of the new church was laid on Beaton Street, August 18, 1957. In the Plattsburgh Press Republican dated March 22nd, 1960, she said, and I quote, "I want to thank physicians, hospital staff, and nurses for their kindness to me while in the hospital. The friends who called to see me there helped the days to pass quickly. I thank everyone who made my 85th birthday happy. The calls, gifts, 150 cards, and prayers were wonderful. Also, I say thanks to the Press Republican and Mrs. Cynthia Rees for the photography and article. So many friends from out of the city spoke of the article when they wrote to me." End of quote. Margaret was interviewed and her photograph was taken for the Press Republican on March 12, 1960. On March 12, 1960, by Mrs. Rees. She left home at a young age to take care of children for the Baker family. They were white. According to Maggie in Spartan, Georgia, the Negroes and whites got along well together. She said she had nice schools and couldn't understand why the Negroes would want to go to school with the whites. At the time of the interview, she was living with the minister and his wife of the First Methodist Church, Mr. and Mrs. Lauro. Mrs. Lauro said that Maggie is loved and respected by everyone who knows her. Maggie was a loyal member of the First Methodist Church when she came to Plattsburgh. She received $30 monthly from Social Security, but she gave her church $4 weekly. She departed her earthly home in July 1960, and she is also buried at the Riverside Cemetery. George and Electa Nutt. George Nutt was born sometime between 1817 and 1820. In the 1850 census, his race was classified as black, and his birthplace was listed as Ireland. But in 1860, he was mulatto, and his birthplace was New York, and remained the same for subsequent censuses. George married Alice Electa McDuffie, and she was white and born in Vermont. They had 4 children: Alonzo, George, Alice, and Albert. Alice chose to use her middle name, Electa, when completing the census. Her full name was on her death certificate. From 1850 to 1860, they resided in Beekmantown. But in 1860, George said he was a farmer and he owned property valued at $700, and his personal estate was worth $195. However, in 1870, George Nutt went to Pleasant Prairie, Martin County, Minnesota. He completed the census that year in Minnesota, and he's the only one listed in the household. His wife did not complete a census. His family, it seems, remained in Beekmantown. By the 1880 census, George and Electa are living in Pleasant Prairie, Martin County, Minnesota. His father, he says, was born in Massachusetts, and his mother was born in New York. He was still a farmer, but his race is now white. His wife was still with him, and he had a granddaughter, Holly, staying with him also. In the 1900 census, George was still considered white, and he was a retired farmer. Electa, though, is 79. In this census, George's father's birthplace is the same as his mother's in New York. And there was a larger difference in his age and his wife's age. He was 90, his wife is now 79. In previous census, he was about 3 years older. By 1900, though, they are living in East Chain, Martin County, Minnesota. His son, who was named for him, was also living there. They would effectively merge into the white community when they moved to Minnesota, and you can kind of see why. And I was able to sort of trace that because Alice dropped her first name. Electa is not a very common name, and also some of the children followed them there as well. Beecher Ellis Hamilton was born about 1880 in Beaufort, North Carolina. He was actually married to Agnes McDurfee in Clinton, New York. Beecher lived at 30 Miller Street and had resided in Plattsburgh for 28 years. He was a veteran of the Spanish-American War and of World War I. Hamilton was a chef by trade and was employed at the Elks Club for many years. His career as a chef started on a dining car of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad, and later he accepted a position with the Woodruff Hotel in Watertown. During the last war, which was World War I, he was employed as a painter at the Plattsburgh Barracks. In 1923, he accepted a position as chef of the Plattsburgh Elks Club and was continuously employed there until 1943, when he was obliged to retire because of ill health. He and his wife was buried at the Riverside Cemetery, and he received military honors. At the time of his death, August 8, 1944, he was survived by his wife, 2 sisters, and 2 brothers. His funeral was attended by a large number of members of the Plattsburgh Lodge of Elks. Members of the Elks Clubs were also pallbearers: William McMillan, Arthur Sharon, Charles M. Morehouse, Robert Foote, Frank A. Wildermuth, and Clement LaPointe, and delegations from the Spanish War veterans and the Lodge formed an honorary escort. My next story is an earlier version of the O.J. Simpson story without love involved. It's the unexpected demise of George Tankard. And I quote, "One of the most brutal and unprovoked murders in the criminal history of Essex County was committed in Keysville early Monday morning," end quote. And this was per the Plattsburgh Daily Press and dated September 26, 1894. The tragedy occurred in a small one-story frame house on Port Kent Hill, about half a mile from the business portion of the village. George Tankard, the murdered victim, was around 19 years of age, was last seen alive about 1:30 that afternoon with his uncle, William Davis. William, often referred to as Pops Davis, lived in Burlington, but had been staying with the Tankards for 2 or 3 weeks. Mrs. Tankard, a widow, had told Pops she could no longer support him and told him to leave. This upset him, and he became angry. Mrs. Tankard went to work and returned home around 10 p.m. that evening and found her door locked. She was able to enter her home through a window. After lighting a lamp, she was horrified to see a large pool of blood on the floor. She was unable to locate her son when she searched the main level of the house. Mrs. Tankard went to the attic and found a bundle of carpet. Beneath the carpet was her son. It was determined by the position of the body that George was asleep when he was murdered. The murder weapon was a hammer, and there were 4 wounds on his head. It was believed that the first blow caused instant death. but Davis gave him a blow on each temple and on his jaw. A search of the house revealed the weapon, a hammer covered with blood and wrapped in a bloody handkerchief, was found behind a watch stand. After murdering his nephew, Davis went to the railroad depot and tried to have the conductor pass him to Port Kent by saying he was a railroader. The conductor refused his request. He was able to get to the boat by begging a farmer to give him a ride. He paid his fare from Port Kent to Burlington with money that his victim's mother had given him. Burlington police arrested him after the sheriff telegraphed the chief of police. Tankard was said to have been a young man of good habits, honest and hardworking, and not a quarrelsome disposition. The reason for the murder was George's mother insisting that Pops had to earn his own living. Davis' motive was revenge upon the mother by killing the son. He had a bad record, having served 2 terms in Windsor, Vermont State Prison and 1 in the workhouse at Rutland. At Windsor, while shaving a keeper, he attempted to cut his throat and was given 2 additional years. The excitement in Keysville was at a fever pitch after George's murder. And if Davis had been found in the vicinity, there may not have been a trial, as the citizens were undoubtedly have strung him to the nearest tree. The grand jury, however, found an indictment of murder in the first degree against Davis. When I finish reading this, you'll never want to be named George Tankard. On April 6, 1896, about 3 o'clock, as George Tankard, a colored man living in the village of Redford, was lying on a lounge in his kitchen, his wife, Hattie, stole up behind him with a revolver of small caliber and fired at him, hitting him squarely in the back, inflicting a very dangerous, if not fatal, wound. Dr. C.S. Haynes was called, but his efforts to extract the bullet proved futile. Last summer, Mrs. Tankard tried to poison George by administering Paris Green, but failed on account of an overdose. No one knows why she did it. Hattie was mentioned as Native American when she tried to burn down the barn of her neighbors, but as white when she was charged for shooting her husband. She had been heard to say that she would fix him the first chance she got. It was thought that the wound would prove fatal to him, but he survived both attempts. His wife, though, would be arrested for shooting him and would end up in the Auburn prison for 4 years, 11 months for assault. She was sentenced December 19, 1896, and released July 10, 1900. On Route 9 in the Beekman town, there was a club, a restaurant called the House by the Side of the Road. The name may have been the result of a popular song from 1928 with the same title. The club was owned by William Billy Grant. The house by the side of the road was about 5 miles north of the city limit and was scheduled to open in September 1956. The building was one of 11 commercial construction projects that started and finished the same year. The pink and gray colored building measured 30 feet by 60 feet and was ongoing interior construction in August of that year. It was equipped with a cocktail lounge, restaurant, and bar, and specialized in catering to weddings, banquets, and meals to take out per grant. The total construction cost in the Press Republican dated August 7 was estimated at $45,000. However, this may have been a typing error, and the cost may have been around $4,500. The club was one of 8 establishments that applied and received an all-night license for New Year's Eve from the Clinton County Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. Without that license, establishments had to close at 11 p.m. A bartender playing pool accidentally shot himself in the foot with his pistol while playing pool at the club. The gun was in his right pocket. It's a good place to put it, right? He tried treating himself but had to go to Mary Fletcher Hospital when a bone infection set in. As a result, it was several days before this incident was reported to the police. Billy, though, let's get back to Billy, may have arrived as the result of a car accident in which a white man was killed down in New York City. He was sent to Dunbar prison. After serving his time, he remained in the area and purchased land on Route 9. Billy first opened a candy store. He later built the club and partnered with 2 gentlemen, Edward Randolph and Jimmy Campbell. They were also African Americans. Per a notice in the North Countryman, under the local party line section, it said, and I quote, Billy Grant, another former resident who had made many friends in this area over the years, is proprietor and owner of the house by the side of the road, end quote, on Route 9H between here and Plattsburgh. The North Countryman was a publication from Rouse's Point. There are more details to all of these stories that I'm giving you, but we could be here all night, and I don't want that, and I know you don't either. We have one more after this one. Everybody may know this lady. Jacqueline Archer. Jackie Archer was born in 1928, and she was raised in Key Point, New Jersey. That area was predominantly white today. When she lived there, the black population percentage was about the same as in Clinton County when she moved here, which is now about, almost 40 years ago. About 92% of the African Americans were clustered in a 3-block area. She was an excellent student, and by age 12 had joined Keyport's Junior Auxiliary of the American Legion, becoming the group's historian a year later. Jackie was also a Toastmistress, a Glee Club leader, and an honor roll pupil. In 1942, she joined the Junior Red Cross. She was the first African American cheerleader at her high school, and she captained the varsity cheerleading club. She graduated high school in 1945 and went to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. She met Martin Luther King at Spelman and became friends with his sister, Christine. She did experience Southern racism, including sitting in the back of the bus because of her skin color. Jackie married Lord Archer, and they moved to Jamaica, Long Island, where her 2 daughters, Taryn and Tracy, were born. She was a home service worker there for the American Red Cross and chaired a fundraising project for a club Lloyd belonged to. However, she decided that city living wasn't the best for raising children, so they moved to this area in the fall of 1962, and she settled on Ashley Road in Beekmantown. I met Jackie when I moved here. She actually stopped by my home to welcome me to the community. In Clinton, Jackie continued her public service work. She was the founder of the Martin Luther King Commission and celebration that is held each year at Newman Center on his holiday, but now is virtual. Jackie chaired the NAACP in Plattsburgh for several years. She worked on a committee to bring a gift shop to CVPH, so thanks to Jackie for that. And she was on a committee to make public facilities handicapped accessible in the area because she herself had a handicap. She was diagnosed with a debilitating illness, but that didn't slow her down. She would pass away, however, unfortunately, on April 9th, 2001. Our last person was born, it was Eliza Matilda Dunbar Johnson Moore. It's quite a mouthful. Born March 5th, 1932 in Dayton, Ohio, Eliza was named after the mother of poet laureate Paul L. Dunbar, and she was christened in the Dunbar home. She was married to Douglas F. Moore, who was in the military, and they had three sons, Ernest, Douglas, and Charles. Ernest, though, preceded her in death. Eliza graduated from Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Dayton, where she received numerous awards and recognitions for oratorical skills. She studied at Wilmington College, and she received a bachelor's degree in education from Plattsburgh State University. She was an active member of the Champlain Valley Oratorio Society for years, which is now called CVV, performing in numerous spring and summer concerts at SUNY Plattsburgh. Her father, Ernest Johnson, was the region's first black master plumber in Ohio, and her mother, Charlize Higgins Johnson, was a published poet. Eliza's eyes glistened as she spoke of Sundays where the extended family gathered with her grandparents, Reverend Charles Higgins, and her grandmother, Julia Galloway Higgins, who was a suffragette and one of the nation's first black Red Cross nurses. As the daughter of Charles Higgins and Ernest Johnson, Eliza is a direct descendant of John Isaac Davis, a 1780 slave. In 1802, John Isaac Davis escaped Kentucky with his infant daughter, Charity. He settled with his baby along the river where the child grew up in the city of Dayton, Ohio. Her mother was believed to have died of smallpox. Eliza is one of Charity's children. She was a devoted mother and wife of 58 years. She was a skilled seamstress. She made suits and dresses for her children. She wanted her family to be an example of Christ's love and to inspire others. Eliza moved on to her heavenly home on March 8, 2020. Now, it took a lot to put those stories together, and I have to acknowledge several people for that.
That's great.
The last story was Don. I got the picture of Maggie from Robin, who is in the back. So I would like to acknowledge the following individuals. Tom Calarco, Robin Cardell, the Conroy brothers, who told me all about the house by the side of the road and how their uncle would go over and repair things for his touch of drink. That was John, Mark, Peter, and Tommy. Mary Fogarty, Emily McMasters, Helen Nurska, Don Patson, Anastasia Pratt, Addie Shields, and of course I will also give a shout out, he's not up there, Gary Vancour, who is the Beekman Town historian. Said he didn't know a lot about it, but he did let me ruffle through his files, so I appreciate that. So I'll open it up for questions, and thank you for attending.
questions?
Yes.
Jackie, you have an awful lot of people who, like in various censuses and very reporting times, re-identified themselves between black and mulatto and some even white. Is there a reason that that happened, or was it just random?
I think when you're talking about the census takers sometimes will make the distinction as to what people were. Some could have insisted that they be classified a certain way, but you don't really know how that is until the census come back. In the case of the Nuts, which is the one that you're referring to that actually merged into the white community, I think that was their intended option, that's what they wanted to do. His wife was white. If you saw his picture, he himself looked white. So he was able to make that crossover rather easily.
To turn past something.
Right, and he was smart. He did not do it close to home. He went to Minnesota, and so from then on, he was always considered white.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well.
Any other questions? I know it's a lot.
Oh.
Does anybody know if the Durkee that you were talking about is the namesake for the street? What's the history of the street?
I don't know. I did ask someone that said they didn't think it was, but I'm still doing some research to really find out. Yes.
Jackie, how long did it take you to do all this research? Can you share that with us?
Quite a bit.
Did everybody hear that question? 'Cause that's a
Yeah, she wanted to know how long it took for me to do all this research, and I didn't really clock out when I started, so I couldn't tell you, but it took quite a bit, and you pick up pieces here and there. I don't know, I didn't really think about it. It's kind of fun to put these stories together. When I talk about the Tankard and the O.J. Simpson trial being kind of the same, the newspaper helped a lot. So take advantage of the New York State historical newspapers. They are really wonderful. Sometimes the pictures aren't the greatest, so it's good to know someone at the Press Republican, and they can get you a better shot. But no, I think, oh gosh, I started doing this when I did the presentation for the bicentennial of Beekmantown, and that's probably been about 3 years.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because I had the privilege of working with Jackie, and she was a research librarian at YSJZ for toxicologists, pathologists, anybody that was doing any drug safety metabolism research. And Jackie was often under pressure to get back data if a pathologist or toxicologist, right, Jackie?
Yes.
So she can do it quickly or she can take her time.
Well, this I could take my time, but
That's right.
actually I want sometimes to do it a little bit faster. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Jackie.
If not, thank you.
Thank you.